Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom and prosperity and what you can do about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Finzer.
This is David Finzer, broadcasting for the next 2 hours from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad, along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,129th day of voluntary exile in protest from an ever less free America. To comment during the program, you can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. As soon as our new studio is finished, you'll also be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada, or Skype and join the conversations. But it's still summer, it's August, you know how contractors are, so we're a bit behind schedule in getting our studio put together. Also remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. According to the Big Clock on truthandliesradio.com's FATCA/TaxMageddon countdown page, your taxes will skyrocket and your worldwide financial privacy will expire in 145 days, 12 hours, 51 minutes, and 3 seconds. Well, up to the news. Let's talk about Mr. Obama's unemployment albatross. July's job figures confirm the U.S. economy is running in place, which means it's moving backwards. A troubling sign for Mr. Obama's re-election hopes. While the monthly job figures have jumped up and fallen back down, back and forth, growth in the United States has been remarkably and consistently weak for the last 19 months. The economy averaged gains of 150,000 jobs per month for all of 2011. So far in 2012, the monthly gains averaged just 151,000. So for that extra $1,000 jobs, many of which come from summer jobs only, Mr. Obama spent an awful lot of money and gotten very little in return. The poor figures show an economy adding jobs very slowly and not nearly at a quick enough pace to lower the nation's jobless rate, which jumped to 8.3% in July. Gains of 150,000 a month are barely enough to keep up with population growth, and they imply a corresponding drop in the unemployment rate. And to suggest that they employ a corresponding drop in the unemployment rate is quite misleading. Unemployment has dropped from 9.1% in January 2011 to 8.3% now, according to the government, assuming you trust the government. Boosting the Obama's campaign argument, the administration's policies have helped the nation lift itself out from the Great Recession that began more than 4 years ago. But it's a lie. Much of the drop in the unemployment rates comes from workers leaving the workforce. The percentage of workers in the civilian labor force in January 2011 was 64.2%. In July, that had dropped to 63.7%. A big portion of this decline is the retirement of the baby boomer generation, which will slowly transform the country's demographics and eventually make it even harder for the nation's economy to grow, giving the expected surge in Social Security spending and Medicare spending. Of course, there's Obamacare. We won't even go into that right now. Another part of the decline comes from workers who have simply given up on the search for a job because of the difficult job market, or simply because they're just too damn lazy. Point in fact, the economy is in trouble, and it's in trouble for one reason and one reason alone, and I'm not going to count the number of letters because I'm not going to play Joe Biden and say if there are 3 letters in jobs. It comes down to too much government. Too much government tax, too much government regulation, too many government obstacles to opening new businesses, And that's today. You know, I remember, almost 30 years ago, well, I had been to Korea, and I found these really cute teddy bears. They were just the most darling things I had ever seen. And I thought, gee, this is great. I'm here now. It was in the summer. If I start working on this now, I can import those and sell them for Christmas. So I was working in Washington at the time, and I thought, gee, well, this is great. So let me check on what I had to do. Well, forget that. Simply to import stuffed teddy bears, I had to bring in a bunch of bears to give to the Consumer Products Protection Agency so they could see what would happen if they ate the bears, I suppose, tore off the arms and stuffed the stuffing up their nose, use them in the toaster, or tried to flush them down the toilet, or ate the eyes off, or whatever the Consumer Product Protection Agency does. And so it became impossible for me to do, and I just gave up the idea. Now, that was one little job, one little example 30 years ago of what the federal government was doing, and it has grown tremendously since then. The obstacles to job creation start with the obstacles to business creation. And the big businesses like it that way, because somebody else, some big company wants to import those teddy bears. Some big company that spends millions of dollars on lobbyists and political contributions wants to take your jobs away. Fortunately, I've got mine outside the country. Now we have to pause for 5 minutes for the news. When we come back, we'll point out that HHS Obamacare mandate starts today. Today, the horrible health services mandate goes into effect. Department of Health and Human Services. That was an unintentional slip of the tongue. Goes into effect. Some women will celebrate the advent of free birth control. However, the Independent Women's Forum, to whom I'm grateful for the videos that we're using, the slides that we're using throughout this segment, is a secular, nonpartisan, non-profit organization, and they see these celebrations as misguided. The HHS mandate comes with severe consequences for our liberty, our health care, and our pocketbooks. Hadley Heath, senior policy analyst at IWF and the manager of healthcarelawsuits.org, released a statement from which I've selected the most important points without taking them out of context, as the mainstream media is so fond of doing. She said, "This is not a debate about the morality of birth control. It's not a debate about women's health or even religion. This is a debate about whether or not Americans should be free to make their own decisions about deeply personal moral convictions and live in accordance with those convictions. The government has no place taking sides in this debate of deeply personal moral convictions. Each individual should be free to decide for herself what kind of health care she wants without asking others to follow a one-size-fits-all prescription. The result of all this will be harmful to dissenting organizations, many of which are schools, hospitals, or charities that perform an important role in our society. We shouldn't punish these organizations for serving people outside of their denomination or their church, but this kind of public service should be esteemed and welcomed. This mandate is nothing to celebrate. Instead, we should be realistic about its effects for Americans of all stripes, not just religious people. Organizations that refuse to compromise their religious or moral principles and refuse to provide birth control are facing fines of between $2,000 and $25,000 a year. Now, that's a big depending upon. Well, it could be a flat $2,000, or it could be $100 a day. The Department of Horrible Health Services hasn't decided yet. So they're still playing with that. So, that's a huge, it's a 12,500% or something like that difference between the two. So how can you even plan? And let's just look at it very briefly and what it's going to do, and thank God, again, thank IWF for the slides. First, this will have a chilling effect on religious private schools that educate more than 5 million students. The results will undoubtedly include fewer scholarships for low-income students, delaying or canceling new technology and teaching materials, and firing teachers and increasing class sizes. Gee, that sounds like a good thing, but that's exactly what Obamacare and the HHS mandate wants to do. They want to destroy religious private schools. Religious colleges and universities will face staff cutbacks, higher tuition fees, fewer and smaller scholarships, and probably even fewer students admitted overall. Again, that sounds to you and I like a bad thing, but this is exactly what this is designed to do. They've already pushed religion out of almost every corner of American life, and they want to push it out of the few remaining corners left, and they're using this to do it. A medium-sized hospital system could face $35 million in fines, and this could severely affect the capacity of those hospitals to properly serve the 1 in 6 Americans who use them. Fewer residencies would be available to train specialists. Less resources would be available for the latest technology, and undoubtedly health care would become more costly and less available. Even small charities with more than 50 employees would be facing fines starting at $40,000 plus per year and possibly as much as $25 million a year, depending upon which fine structure the HHS decides to apply. These charities provide food services to 6 million people and also support numerous domestic violence shelters for women. Now again, these ought to be good things that the government should be applauding and if not supporting, but just leaving alone. But they're attacking them because they want the government to do everything. Just like originally in America, charity was up to families and free giving. And the government got involved in that and have destroyed much of charity. Originally, your retirement plan was called savings and family and paying off the mortgage on the family farm, and now we've been trained to be dependent upon Social Security, and when you open the Social Security lockbox, moths fly out because it's all invested in the federal government itself. People of all faith, or with no faith at all, should be concerned about what this type of government overreach means. The federal government should think twice before asking these important schools, hospitals, and charities to choose between violating their consciences and reducing their services. Millions of people in America rely on the important charity and services provided by various religious organizations. Organizations who serve populations outside their immediate religious community, like hospitals, schools, charities, shouldn't be punished for doing so. They should be commended. But that's not Mr. Obama's America. Now, we all know that Mr. Obama likes immigration because, as the cartoon sort of indicates, the Democratic Party just loves to register illegal immigrants. They have a war against Florida and other states that want to have people have to have an ID to register to vote and be able to prove that they're citizens to register to vote. And of course, the Democratic Party is opposed to that. Vote early, often, and illegally if you can. But let's analyze these immigrants just a little bit. And let's use government census information. You know, I don't want to make anything up. They might, but at least I'm using something that's supposedly legitimate. Using the latest Census Bureau data from the 2010 and 2011, it's fairly easy to create a picture of more than 50 million illegal immigrants and their U.S.-born children. That's legal and illegal. One of the most important findings is that immigration has drastically increased the size of the nation's lowest income population. While many immigrants make significant progress, they no longer live in the country. But the majority of immigrants who have been in the United States for 20 years are much more likely to live in poverty, lack health insurance, and access the welfare system than are native-born Americans. Let's look at the overall numbers. The number of immigrants, legal and illegal, in the country hit a record of 40 million in 2010, a 28% increase over the total in 2000. Now, when you consider 1 million Americans a year are trying to get out, this is pretty interesting and tells you how bad some of these places must be. Of the top sending countries, the largest percentage increase in the last decade was from those from the Honduras, an 85% increase, India, a 74% increase, Guatemala, a 73% increase, Peru, a 54% increase, El Salvador, I guess those that don't get shot try to get the hell out, a 49% increase, Ecuador, a 48% increase, and Red China, a 43% increase. Now, the Chinese are usually pretty hard workers. I just wonder how many of that 43% are Red Chinese agents. Let's look at the labor force. As of March 2011, the share of working age 18 to 65 immigrants holding a job was the same as U.S. natives, 68%. Immigrant men have higher rates of work than native-born men, while immigrant women have lower rates. While immigrants tend to be concentrated in certain jobs, natives comprise the majority of workers in virtually every occupational category. For example, natives comprise 52% of maids, 73% of janitors, 66% of construction laborers, and 65% of butchers and meat processors. So all this crap about the immigrants doing jobs no one else will do, it seems like an awful lot of these jobs are being done by Native Americans already. Poverty. In 2010, 23% of immigrants and their U.S.-born children under 18 lived in poverty, compared to 13.5% of natives and their children. Immigrants and their children accounted for 1/4 of all persons in poverty. The children of immigrants account for 1/3 of all children in poverty. Among the top sending countries, poverty is highest for immigrants and their young children from Mexico at 35%, Honduras with 34%, Guatemala with 31%, and the lowest is from Germany, 7%. You know, the Germans, alles muss in Ordnung sein, they're out hardworking. India, who are always hardworking, family enterprises, and the Philippines, who should have been left to become part of America, 6%. Now, we're far from over on analyzing these immigrants, so when we come back, we're going to talk about welfare use, we're going to talk about health insurance coverage, public schools, home ownership, and other things, and compare immigrants to American citizens. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. I'll be gone for 6 minutes for the news and a commercial, but I'll be back, so don't go away. Stay tuned. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Welcome back. We're talking about immigrants, and we're using the census figures to do some analysis and understand them better, perhaps. Welfare use. In 2010, 36% of immigrant-headed households used at least one major welfare program, primarily food assistance and Medicaid, compared to 23% of native households. Among the top sending countries, welfare use is highest for households headed by immigrants from Mexico with 57%, Guatemala with 53%, and the Dominican Republic with 54%, and lowest for those from Canada, 13%, Germany, 10%, and the UK, 6%. Health insurance coverage. In 2010, 29% of immigrants and the U.S.-born children under 18 lacked health insurance, compared to 13.8% of natives and their children. New immigrants in the U.S.-born account for 2/3 of the increase in the uninsured since 2012. All of these people that Mr. Obama wants to amnesty and leave in account for 2/3 of the increase of the uninsured. One more excuse for Obamacare. Among the top sending countries, the highest rates of uninsurance are for those from Guatemala, 46%, Honduras, 44%, El Salvador, 44%, and Mexico, 41%, and lowest from Canada, 9%, Japan, 8%, and Germany, 5%. Now, I cannot help but draw this conclusion just thus far. Notice the countries that are poor, where they have the poorest people, the most uninsured, those using welfare, etc., are almost all from countries where the people from those countries, when they become citizens or when they vote, whether they're citizens or not, vote for the Democrat Party. That makes me very suspicious. Public schools. There are 10.4 million students from immigrant households in public schools, according to accounting for 1 in 5 public school students. That's 20%. Of these students, 78% speak a language other than English at home. Overall, 1 in 4 public school students now speak a language other than English at home. Home ownership. Of immigrant households, 53% are owner-occupied compared to 68% of native households. Rates of home ownership are highest for immigrants from Italy, 83%, Germany, 75%, the UK, 73%, and lowest from Guatemala, 30%, Honduras, 28%, and Dominican Republic, 24%. Entrepreneurship. Immigrants and natives, interestingly, have almost identical rates of entrepreneurship, 11.7 for natives and 11.5 for immigrants are self-employed. Among the top sending countries, self-employment is highest for immigrants from Korea, Canada, and the UK. It's lowest for those from Haiti, Honduras, and Jamaica. So we know who comes and adds to the economy. Education. Of adult immigrants, 25 to 65, 28% have not completed high school compared to 7% of natives. At the same time, immigration has added significantly to the number of less educated workers. The share of young, less educated natives holding a job declined significantly. If you can't read, it's damn hard to hold a job. The decline began well before the current economic turndown. Of course, they come in, they don't learn the language, they don't speak it at home. It's hard to get a job. Progress over time. Many immigrants do make significant progress the longer they live in the country. However, an average of even immigrants who have lived in the United States for 20 years has not come close to closing the gap with natives. The poverty rate of adult immigrants who have lived in the United States for 20 years is 50% higher than that of adult natives. The share of adult immigrants who live in the United States for 20 years who lack health insurance is twice as high as that of adult natives. The share of households headed by an immigrant who's lived in the United States for 20 years using one or more welfare programs is nearly twice as high as that of native-headed households. The share of households headed by an immigrant who's lived in the United States for 20 years that are owner-occupied is 22% lower than that of native households. Legal status. It's estimated that 28% of all immigrants in the country are in illegally. Roughly half of Mexican and Central American are 1/3 of South American immigrants are here illegally, are there illegally, not here. We don't have, fortunately in the survey, we don't have Mexican and Central American immigrants that are here illegally. State data. Among the top immigrant receiving states, poverty among immigrants and their children is highest in Arizona at 37%, North Carolina 29%, Minnesota 29%. It's lowest in Massachusetts, Maryland, and New Jersey. Among the top immigrant receiving states, welfare use by immigrant households is highest in Minnesota, New York, and Texas, and lowest in Virginia, Georgia, and Nevada. Among top immigrant receiving states, home ownership for immigrant households is highest in Florida, Illinois, and Maryland, and lowest in California. Well, who can afford a house in California? Massachusetts and Minnesota. Among top immigrant receiving states, the share of adult immigrants who have not completed high school is highest in Texas with 46%, Colorado 41%, and North Carolina 36%. It's lowest in Virginia with 15%, Massachusetts 15%, and Florida 16%. Now, what's this mean? While immigrants have made America, it's a different America from the days when you could land, walk off the ship, and head inland until you found some empty property and staked a claim. Then, if you were lazy or stupid, you starved or the Indians got you. Now what's happening, obviously by these figures, is America's culture is being changed from the melting pot paradigm of WASP culture, whether you like it or not, that's what it was called. And while I'm white, I'm neither Anglo-Saxon nor Protestant. Okay, but that was the cultural consensus. English speaking with a history that goes all the way back to the UK and all the way back to Magna Carta. These immigrants come from an entirely different culture with different cultural values, with lower expectations because so many of them come from absolute holes like in Central America and Mexico, where everything is cheap, dirty, and nasty. And so thus, they are often jealous of what the natives have. They fit in with the Obama agenda, which is why they're let in. The figures speak for themselves. When I come back, we're going to talk about some important congressional races that will help determine the role of Congress, control of Congress after the next election. This is David Finzer. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. As we go into this last segment for this hour, let's talk a little bit about elections. Now, those of you who were listening yesterday to the second hour had listened to Scott Chambers, Tim Sutton, and I argue about the virtues or lack thereof of the two candidates for president, the two major candidates for president, Mr. Romney and Mr. Obama. And I still maintain that we're looking at, in one case, we have an evil we know, which is Obama, who's a socialist and a liar, and most of the words I can think of to describe him I'm not allowed to say on radio, so I shan't say them here. And then we have Mr. Romney, who is basically mush and thinks he has some divine right or need to be president. I think, and of course Gary Johnson, while I have some reservations about some of his opinions, were I voting, I would vote for him, at least as a protest vote. But there are some elections that are going to count, and those are the congressional elections. Because, first of all, there's a really good chance for the Republicans to take control of the Senate, and there's a chance to increase the number of conservatives in the House that maybe could overthrow that lousy House Speaker, John Boehner, and get somebody in, as much as I hate to say it, more like Newt Gingrich, as much of a scumbag as he was personally. He was a good House Speaker, and he kept his contract with America. So I prefer to focus and try to get you to focus on the one thing that really counts, and the election that really counts, which are the congressional elections, because Congress controls the money. You know, Maya Rothschild said, give me control of a country's currency. I care not who governs. Well, I'll tell you what, Mr. Rothschild, if I have control of what the government can spend, then that puts me in a pretty good position too. So that's what we ought to be shooting for, are people who will vote no, 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 and no again. I remember Jesse Helms used to keep on his desk a big rubber stamp that had to be 4 inches by 8 inches that said across it just the words no. And when some stupid bill would come into his office and his staff would want him to consider, he'd just take the rubber stamp out and slam it across the top and throw the bill out. Anyway, Representative Todd Akin, who played up his Tea Party credentials and conservative appeal, broke out from a 3-way Missouri Republican primary on Tuesday to earn the right to take on Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill, setting up one of the most closely watched Senate races in 2012. Even assuming that Mr. Obama wins, with that assumption, the Republicans can take control of the Senate with 4 gains. In Michigan, meanwhile, Republicans selected former Pete Hoekstra to oppose Democrat Senator Debbie Stabenow in November. Democratic Representative John Conyers, a black communist, staved off a primary challenge in a slightly redrawn district to advance to November's election, where he will almost certainly win his 25th consecutive term in Congress. He's got a district that was created to elect black leftists. Now, when states create districts that don't elect blacks, guarantee blacks in Congress, then they're gerrymandering. Then they're breaking federal law. But when they create districts that specifically are designed to elect blacks, then that's okay. I used to live in a state Senate district in Florida called the Spider. And it was because it took the black section of Bradenton, south of Tampa Bay, ran a 100-yard strip north to the black section of St. Petersburg. I happened to be in that 100-yard strip. Then jumped across Tampa Bay again on a 100-yard strip to the black section of Tampa, and then ran another 100-yard strip to the black section of Lakeland. That district was specifically designed to have a black state senator. You know, if that were done to elect white people, it would be illegal. Consequently, I basically had no representation in the Senate because of my race. That's racism. Anyway, amid primary elections in 4 states Tuesday, Missouri's Republican Senate primary figured to have the most national significance. The GOP needs a net 4 seats from the Democrats to gain control of the Senate, as I said, and Republicans view McCaskill as among their top targets this year. The choice is clear in November, Aiken said in the victory speech. The big spending, budget-busting, job-killing liberal or the less spending, balanced budget, job-creating conservative. That's a pretty stark contrast. In an interview with the Associated Press, McCaskill, the Democrat, said, I don't know what Missouri voters will ever have. I don't know that Missouri voters will ever have more of a contrast, she added. The issue is not whether you can label him as a conservative, but whether or not he is on the fringe. A very extreme candidate. I believe he is. Oh, baloney. That's what the left does all the time. You know, an ultra-left-winger is called a liberal. A conservative is called an extreme right-winger. It's bull. Aiken has good credentials. He's a former Army officer, engineer, and state lawmaker. He won election to the U.S. House in 2000 after narrowly winning a 5-person Republican primary. Polls indicate that he stands a really good chance of defeating the Democrats. In Michigan, Hoekstra enters his race against Stabenow as the underdog. She's the chairwoman of the Senate's Agricultural Committee and is seeking a 3rd term and has enjoyed a steady lead in the polls, but as the economy continues to go to hell, anything can happen. On the Democrat side in Michigan, Conyers handily defeated his primary challenger, like I said, and he's had few serious primary challengers since first winning election in 1965. He'll win, no doubt. In Washington State, Democrat Susan DelBene won her primary to take on Republican John Koster in the newly drawn 1st Congressional District. The seat is open after Representative Jay Inslee resigned to run for governor. Now remember, all the congressional districts in all the states that have more than one congressman have been redrawn because of the census. It happens every 10 years, and they redraw the districts. So you might not even be voting for the same guy that you voted for the last 10 years. So you might go and check what district you're in and make sure you know who you're going to be voting for. Even on the state legislative level, this happens. It happens across the board. The Kansas primary was defined by a fight between the state's Republican Party's conservative wing and its leftist wing. Conservative Republican challengers had unseated 6 so-called moderates in the Kansas Senate and led 2 others, improving their chances of reshaping the legislature and ending a roadblock to the political rights agenda. Now, like I said, the congressional elections are the important ones. The Constitution was designed so that Congress would be the most powerful of the 3 branches. That's why it's in Article 1. It has absolute control over spending, save only one thing. The only thing it can't do is it cannot reduce the salaries of federal judges while they're in office. It's the only thing it cannot do. It doesn't have to fund Obamacare. It doesn't have to fund a war in Afghanistan and Iraq and in Syria and Libya and whatever. It doesn't have to fund Medicare. It doesn't have to even fund salaries. It doesn't have to fund the FBI. So if the Republicans were to take control and you had real libertarian conservative leadership who really wanted to listen to Ron Paul, Rand Paul, the Tea Party, and others, and really cut spending, not just this crap of cutting the growth of spending, you still have a chance to make changes. They could repeal the NDAA. They could repeal the Patriot Act. They could throw out the secret courts. They could even refuse, if Obama was elected, refuse his appointments to the Supreme Court if people retire. Or they can do like they did to Andrew Johnson, even abolish the Supreme Court seat so he couldn't have anybody to appoint. They could refuse to confirm his appointments to ambassadors, his appointments to the cabinet. They could refuse to appoint military officer appointments. The Senate has a tremendous amount of power over appointments. The House has a tremendous amount of power over the money. If they choose to be confrontational, and that's the only way to deal with this man, then they are in a position to really make a difference. Well, now we are at the top of the first hour, but when we come back, I'll be joined on Wanton Wednesday with Juan Torres, our U.S. Injustice co-host, and we'll talk about some nasty things that the government's doing to people, including tasering a blind, innocent black woman who called for help. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. This is David Finzer broadcasting for the second hour from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad, along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,129th day of voluntary exile in protest from an ever less free America. To comment during the program temporarily until our audio studio is done, you can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, crammed together in all one word, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. We're working hard to get the new studio finished and hope to have it done in the next 2 weeks. Also remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. Well, according to the U.S. debt clock, the total U.S. national debt is $15,952,394,000,000 with a debt of just over $50,000 per citizen, but per taxpayer the debt is almost $140,000, which tells you how many people don't pay taxes and are deadbeats. The gross domestic product, of course, lags behind by about $600 trillion, which just proves what I keep on saying. The United States is essentially bankrupt. It would take more than a year if you gave all the goods and services produced in the United States in a year, it still wouldn't pay off the national debt. That's just the federal debt. The total debt of the United States is a staggering $56,960,782,000,000. That's a lot of money. That comes out to $684,000 per family. I'm sure you keep that in your back pocket, so it's nothing to worry about. Well, today is Wednesday, and so it is Wanton Wednesday, and our Wanton co-host is Juan Torres. Wanton doesn't refer to Juan. He's one of the good guys. He's even wearing a white suit because he's a good guy.
You.
Now, of course, I think it's appropriate, Juan, that you're wearing a black shirt underneath, because this shows that even though you were trained to work for the forces of darkness as an attorney, that you've overcome that and are now working for the angels.
Actually, it was a brown shirt, but it's dark brown.
Well, okay. Well, I don't know if you want to admit to being a brown shirt. You know, the mainstream media might take that out of context, and next thing we see, Cuban-American brown shirt stormtrooper attorney.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, they never make mistakes, like the cops never make mistakes, right?
No.
Right. Well, let's talk about a mistake that, if it had been done by anyone other than the cops, certainly would have been racist. Increasingly innocent people find themselves at the wrong end of police tasers. An innocent, deaf black woman in Washington called 911 for help. Well, of course, in Washington, calling 911, you might as well just give up. Because, when my office was broken into, it took them 3 weeks to get there, literally. She didn't get help. Instead, she got tased and arrested. LaShawn White was in jail for about 3 days without an interpreter. despite 2 state laws requiring law enforcement to appoint an interpreter for deaf suspects. So I guess it was Washington State, not D.C. But anyway, it's still bad. White was attacked in her apartment on April 6. Although she's deaf, she was able to communicate with a 911 dispatcher using a phone equipped with a special video capabilities connected to a TV. Right now, this is serious. She's fighting at me. Then she chokes me. She's coming right at me, White said on the night of her attack. Dispatch logs show that 2 officers from the Tacoma Police, Ryan Koskovich and Michael Young, responded to the scene within about 6 minutes. They received texts on their way with the messages, person doing the hitting is a Sophia, and Vic is LaShawn White. Police records also reveal the officers were informed that White is deaf. This was the conversation when the police arrived. White said, I'm deaf. I can't hear if they're out front knocking or whatever. I can't. Are they going to the front or the back? Where are the police at? Dispatch, they want her to go outside the front door. White said, oh, they're here? Okay, I'm on my way to meet them. I'm going right now. When White walked out the door, she was tased. Her body fell to the pavement, causing her multiple injuries. She was then arrested and taken to jail. Koskovich said he tased White because she ignored my commands. What do you think, Juan?
I think this is egregious. They were aware that she was deaf, mute, that because they
not mute, just deaf.
Well, just deaf. But she came out, she is the victim. Obviously, they had already been texted, as I read your article.
Right.
They had already been texted that she was deaf. So a verbal command won't help here, Mr. Intelligent Officer.
Well, what right
does
he have?
Training.
What right does he have to give her commands in her house anyway?
Well, this is a situation that happens really fast, David. What bothers me is these officers. What area were they in of town? Was it a bad area?
We don't know. That's not reported.
But that all comes into play. So what they see is some woman rushing out of the house. What he should have done, knowing that one of them was mute, or deaf rather, he should have put his hand up.
Yeah.
Like the neighbors say, whoa, stop. With the word stop and put his hand right in front of his mouth.
Yep. But, they overreacted. The woman, it's just ridiculous. Anyway, we'll talk about this and some other things when we come back, but we already have to go for a break. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Stay tuned. When we come back, we'll talk some more. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. I'm joined on Wanton Wednesday with Juan Torres, our U.S. Injustice co-host. Juan, I was thinking about this woman being tased, and it seems to me that the dispatcher bears a large amount of guilt because there's nothing in this story, at least based on this story, that indicates that she told the cops that the woman was deaf.
I thought the article says that she texted.
Well, it says reveals that the police records also reveal the officer were informed that White is deaf, but they don't. The text doesn't say that. So I don't. If in fact the officers then were informed that she was deaf, and she came running out of the house, and she's blind. The guy. First of all, you got 2 cops and one. Obviously.
Doesn't look like a big lady to me.
No, it doesn't look like a big lady to me at all.
And David, you mentioned this is overreaction. It's overreaction because of poor training.
Oh, okay? Is it poor training or just police arrogance? I mean, the police now can do no wrong.
Police arrogance. If you ask me, seeing that I've practiced criminal defense for over 30 years, it's police arrogance. It's police abuse and power. They don't care. They saw a black lady coming out at him. Instead of putting his arm out to stop, if he knew, let's assume for a moment that he knew, he should have put his arm up. It's simple as that. You have to be an idiot to see a woman coming out defenseless with no weapon, nothing in her hands, and you automatically tase her?
They could have just grabbed her.
They could have, 2 of them.
Right. I mean, this makes no sense to me at all, except just arrogant frigging police who think they can do anything they want. And what a lame excuse. She ignored my commands. How the hell was she supposed to know them?
No, the article says they received text on their way with messages. Person, quote, person doing the hitting is Sophia, and victim, V-I-C-T, is LaShawn White. Police records also reveal that the officers were informed that White is deaf.
Right.
So they knew.
Right.
This is absolutely so egregious, and they're going to find themselves in the middle of a huge lawsuit. Because
committed assault and battery against her.
David, if this would have been you and we would be in jail for aggravated assault.
Okay, with a weapon.
Well, that's not. It may not be considered a weapon under the weapons definition of weapons, depending on the state and what the courts, what the man-made law has ruled, interpreting of what a weapon is.
Okay, but definitely it was aggravated assault, and battery, depending upon
aggravated
the state.
battery. They injured her.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they injured her. It's like I represented a police officer, a rookie, many years ago, who was assisting an experienced law enforcement officer and was just sitting there. They went to bust some gamblers. One of the police officers just stood there, didn't do a thing. The rookie, because he didn't know what the other guy was doing. The other guy took all the money, put it in a bag, and they both left. One thought he was going to put it into evidence. Well, the police officer stole the money.
Right.
Well, you know what they got charged with?
What?
Robbery with firearms.
Really?
Oh, yes. And, of course, mine was found not guilty, and it was one of the zeniths of my career where 5 of the 6 jurors came and shook our hands, congratulated us, and one handed my client a Bible.
Good.
They thought that the government's case was atrocious. They could not have believed that they did this against this young man, almost ruined his career, only after being 9 months in the force.
Wow.
So these guys could be charged.
Well, they should be.
And they should be. But I bet you in Tacoma, Washington, that's going to go away. Because the main media is not going to pick this up. They may pick it up for a little bit locally, but that's it.
Well, the other thing I was talking about, you were asking about the neighborhood. It obviously was not one of these public housing projects because it had a front and back door, so it was a house.
Yes.
So, that tells us a little more. And it just seems to be way over the top, but of course everything the government does these days seems to be way over the top.
This kind of coincides with the next thing you want to speak about, these tanks and these government...
Yeah, let's go to that.
Military vehicles. They're just getting us used to what's happening in Libya.
Yeah. Armed military vehicles are now patrolling Wisconsin neighborhoods as part of a training exercise on behalf of the U.S. Army Reserve. The Army Reserve issued a warning to residents of Sheboygan County in order to preempt fears caused by the sight of the vehicles. Of course, we're going to invade you later, so we're going to get you used to seeing us now. So when we do come, you'll think we're just having another practice, I guess.
Another practice, exactly.
Captain William Getty said the U.S. Army Reserve wanted to alert the public to the training dates so residents would not be alarmed when a pack of heavily armored military vehicles is driving around the county, according to the SheboyganPress.com. The exercises are taking place despite the fact that the troops have already received basic training in handling the armored security vehicles. They're vehicles that these military officers might use if they're deployed. They're patrol vehicles, Getty's added, said that the drills were to ensure the officers didn't get rusty in handling the vehicles, which are approximately the size of a large SUV and are used for patrols in Afghanistan.
David, do you realize the problems this is going to cause? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Interrupt whenever you want. That's more fun. Go ahead.
This is crazy. What happens if a car accidentally rams into one of these vehicles? Are they going to start shooting at them? Thinking that it's a terrorist carrying some bombs like they do in Libya? What kind of training do these men have to do this in a state such as Wisconsin? None.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is, according to the report, local authorities had not been briefed about the planned exercise. Sheboygan County Administrator Adam Payne said he'd not heard about it. 2 city officials declined to comment because they also heard nothing about the training.
What appalls me is the 2 individuals, citizens, who said that as a great presence, it'll be a deterrent crime deterrent.
Yeah,
what, are you kidding me? Where are these people's heads at?
Right. Well, I agree with the analysts that have raised concerns that the exercise are just another opportunity for American people to get acclimatized to the presence of military vehicles on residential roads in the event of martial law.
You know what? Even on the event of martial law, if I recall correctly, if martial law cannot be imposed, it's an imposition of some military rule by military authorities on designated regions on an emergency basis only.
Right.
When the civilian government fails to function effectively.
Right, and military courts can only sit when the civil courts aren't sitting.
And that's it.
Right.
Exactly.
Well,
and that's clearly the law.
But I think they, of course...
This is a ruse. This is another ruse, like the war on drugs.
Well, and then let's look at the Posse Comitatus Act, okay?
Oh, come on. What does that say?
Well, let me read it to you, okay?
I got it.
You got it in front of you, but let me read it for my listeners.
Yes.
From and after the passage of this act, it shall not be lawful to employ any part of the Army of the United States as a posse comitatus or otherwise for the purpose of executing the laws, except in such cases and under such circumstances as such employment of said force may be expressly authorized by the Constitution or by an act of Congress, and no money appropriated by this act shall be used to pay any of the expenses incurred in the employment of any troops in violation of this section, and any person willfully violating the provision of this section shall be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor, and on conviction thereof shall be punished by a fine not exceeding $10,000 or imprisonment not exceeding 2 years, or by both such fine and imprisonment. This was after, obviously, the occupation of the South after the war between the states.
You know, what's funny is that the statute, the Posse Comitatus Act in the United States, only applies to the U.S., addresses the U.S. Army. Okay? Mm-hmm. It doesn't say anything about the National Guard, although the National Guard is part of the Army and Air Force or Air Force.
Well, actually, technically, the National Guard is the organized state militia one until they're called into federal service
by the state's governor.
Right.
Not the president, not the Army, not the Air Force, by the governor.
Right, but
they're only invited by the governor.
Right, but this was not done by even the National Guard. This was done by the Reserve, which is part of the Army.
Which totally part of the Army. And to boot, they didn't pass it through the authorities.
Right, they ignored them completely because...
Yeah, what are the law enforcement officers going to do? How are these people trained in dealing with... Let's assume somebody runs out of a bank in front of these trucks with a gun.
Yep.
Are they just going to sit there, David?
Well, we'll talk about the possible repercussions when we come back after 6 minutes. We're at the bottom of the hour, so there's news and a commercial. When we come back, we'll explore Posse Comitatus and these military vehicles running around the local neighborhoods and see what we can come up with. This is David Finzer with Juan Torres for Truth and Lies Radio. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio, and since it's Wednesday, it's Wanton Wednesday, and my co-host the second hour is our U.S. injustice expert, Juan Torres, talking to me from Fort Pierce, Florida, where he practices as a defense attorney, or an offensive attorney sometimes, but anyway. You know, Juan, I wanted to go back and just touch on one thing that I ended the previous hour with. In this Posse Comitatus Act, the part where it says that no money appropriated by this act shall be used to pay any of the expenses.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, this goes to my basic premise on how to deal with government, which is elect people to Congress that can cut off the money, because they can't spend a dime except for federal judges' salaries unless Congress appropriates it. And that would, that's the way to attack this. If you really want to stop all this crap, you start.
Yes.
You defund it and let the government close. For Christ's sakes, let the government close. Yeah. Anyway, we were talking now about the reserve, the Army Reserve, without even telling the county officials. running their armored vehicles through the residential area, and then some people were stupid enough to say, gee, they thought this was good for crime prevention. I mean, do they think the Gestapo and the KGB were good for crime prevention too?
Yeah. Well, David, this is all a ruse. This is all a ruse to get us used to them using the military, whatever, Air Force, Marines, Army, to use it against the people, to quell the people, because, as the article states, they're concerned about the economy collapsing, and it's going to be chaos.
Sure, of course.
But if there's chaos, everybody come to my house. I have plenty of guns.
Well,
but David, I'm looking at I'm going to send it to you after the show. Maybe you can speak about it next time. A cop who was a lady sitting on the ground handcuffed, and he outright kicks her, and they caught it on video.
Good. Well, let's go back to this.
So this goes on everywhere.
Let's go back to this story for a minute. There have been indications that the feds and the military are preparing for mass civil unrest. News reports indicate that the Army and the Department of Fatherland Security recently purchased riot gear in anticipation of the Democratic National Convention, the Republican National Convention, and the presidential inauguration. The Gestapo at the Department of Fatherland Security also purchased 450 million rounds. 450 million rounds. That's more than one per citizen in the United States of .40 caliber bullets. President Obama's signature on the National Defense Resources Preparedness Executive Order in March raised a lot of questions and revealed that the federal government feared an emergency that requires the federal government to take over everything. And I think they're just trying to get people ready for it. And these idiots that thought it was good, they remind me of the people in Aurora who were all arrested, and they thought that was okay too.
Yeah, the ones that were stopped in the street?
Right.
Yes.
And then of course they had the mass shooting. I mean, that's because Colorado has become California sort of a little farther east.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't believe that Americans will allow. You know, we talked when we did the primer on the Bill of Rights about the only amendment they haven't violated is the third quarter of troops. It looks like that's coming too.
It's coming. It's going to come. It's going to come. When that stock market crashes, and it's going to crash, you know it. You've been talking about it. Sooner or later, when the economy gets even worse. I mean, people are stealing. There's no way to survive. But we have enough with the National Guard. They are a militia that is trained to deal with civil individuals,
and who won't fire on their own hometown people,
and who will not. And we have had this argument in Serbia, who will never fire on their own people. The military, on the other hand, they're going to fire. And they're not using rubber bullets, David Fizzer. That's 450 million rounds of .40 cal.
Right. Now,
that's as strong as almost a .45 caliber.
For those who don't know what .40 caliber is, that means it's 4/10 of an inch across, guys. That's a big frigging bullet. A little hole goes in and a real big one comes out.
And, you know, they have hollow points, and they have all kinds of armor-piercing .40 cal. They have all kinds of things. So, and these men, with all due respect, I admire the military. I think what they're doing for America to protect us, and basically around the world, based on stupid ideas of our government sending our boys to die. But I have a lot of respect for them. But they are certainly not ready to deal with civil unrest in our country.
No, and it's not their job to do so.
It never has been. That's why they don't have the training.
Of course. I mean, you need people who are trained in police tactics, not people who are trained in military tactics. I mean,
that's the difference.
You know what they need. You know, so what are they going to do? They're going to some state is going to nullify one more illegal act and say it's not of the federal government, and say they're not going to obey it. Are they going to send in the Army Reserve to quell the state? I mean, Mr. Lincoln did. Why? You know,
I think that what you're going to see is governors saying, "Stay out, stay out, and then they're going to call the National Guard. Like you made this story in Florida, where they came to arrest one of the mayors.
No, it was the governor, Claude Kirk.
It was Claude, yes,
federal judge. And he told the National Guard and the state troopers to shoot the federal marshal if they stepped on state soil.
That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, but that was back when there was still something of the Constitution left, Juan. Now they would just shoot the governor.
Yeah.
I mean, remember, Abraham Lincoln had the doors of the State House in Annapolis, Maryland, locked, and all of the members of the legislature arrested and held without trial or writ of habeas corpus for the entire war between the states, so that Maryland could not vote itself out of the Union. Do you think Obama has not thought about that? It's not a coincidence he took his oath of office on Lincoln's Bible.
Oh, no, it isn't. No, of course not.
I mean, he was the one who destroyed states' rights in the first place. Despite how bad slavery was, he destroyed the states and created a strong federal government. Obama's making it worse. Anyway, we have to break now for 5 minutes for a commercial break, but when we come back, we'll talk about the Democrats' war on women and how it intensifies and how they're paying their own women staffers less. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio, and I'm here with my Wanton Wednesday co-host, Juan Torres, our U.S. injustice expert, and we're going to talk about how the Democrats, the defenders of women's rights, are actually paying all of their female employees across the board less than their male employees. That's pretty interesting, and it's what I think the word that comes to mind is hypocrite, Juan. Is that the proper word?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah, the Washington Free Beacon, which is one of the 40-some-odd newsletters I review every day.
Hello?
Yep, I'm here. The Washington Free Beacon, one of the newsletters I review every day, has found that female employees of the Democratic National Committee earn significantly less than their male counterparts. A review of salary data filed with the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, revealed that the Democratic National Committee paid female staffers $501 less on average than male staffers in July 2012, a 15% difference. Okay? The DNC's 119 female employees earned $33.42 on average in the month of July, compared with $38.43 for its 113 male employees. On an annualized basis, the average female employee would earn roughly $6,000 less than her male coworkers. It was also, the results were consistent with those of reviews of salary data for the White House, Democratic members of Congress, and Mr. Obama's re-election campaign. In 2011, White House female employees got 18% less than their male counterparts. More than a dozen Democrat senators paid their female staff members at least 20% less than male staffers during the same period. The Obama campaign's filings with the FEC revealed that it paid women 5% less than men during the months of May and June. Now, this really undermines this whole thing about the Democrats who've been pushing women's rights for a long time. What do you think, Juan?
This reminds me of Florida.
Okay. You want to explain that?
Where women are paid much less than men in any respect. And this is part of what the Democrats are all about. They blame us Republicans for being unfair, for being for the wealthy, for being corporate. Well, at least the people that I know that are working in corporate, the women are making good money. Okay.
With us Republicans, you're talking about yourself and your wife, or yourself and the mouse in your pocket. You're not including me, I hope. Remember, I'm not a Republican. I'm a monarchist.
Of course you are. But this is part and parcel of what they are. It's just like they create this aura of abuse by the Republicans when they're hiding them themselves. But you know what? They've never noticed this. I'm glad somebody brought this up, because I'll bet you that no one has thought about this, bringing this up, until election year, of course.
Well, the Washington Free Beacon is a pretty good newsletter. I don't agree with everything. I mean, you and I don't agree on everything, and we've been friends for a long time. But, of course, it would be boring if we did. But it uncovers a lot of interesting stuff. Now, what's further interesting is in June, the Senate Democrats, who in more than 1,100 days have not managed to do their constitutional duty and pass a budget, levied the charge against the Republicans for opposing the so-called Paycheck Fairness Act, a bill that would make it easier for trial lawyers to file lucrative class action lawsuits over claims of gender pay discrimination. Critics called the legislation an employment act for trial lawyers, noting that the trial lawyer industry is the top source of campaign contributions for all but 5 members of the Senate Democratic Caucus. Well, we're talking about your profession now. So let's talk about them.
Well, of course, but what this is doing is they're precluding this is gender discrimination. There's no question about it. Not only are they paying them less, and there are women that are much more able than some of the men, and now they're not allowed to bring a class action suit because it's the lawyers who do it. No, it's not the lawyers. We're just the mouthpiece for those that are being trodden upon.
Right. But
for those whose rights are being violated, that's all.
Well, the other thing is, though, Juan, when you get into class action lawsuits, doesn't that usually use a big law firm?
Yes.
So it's again, they're really helping a big corporation. It just happens to be a legal company instead of a big bank or Amazon or something like that.
Yes, in a way, but it's gotten now because of the tough economic times. I'm seeing a lot of more class action suits being filed, even by smaller law firms, because it takes a lot of money to subsidize these lawsuits, and depending on the type of lawsuit class action that it would be. But a lot of lawyers are moving into this class action.
Okay, Juan, we've got like 4 minutes. Can you, in a minute or so, explain what a class action lawsuit is so people understand? Because the word's thrown around a lot, and I think very few people understand it.
Yeah, a class action lawsuit is basically when there is some sort of breach or discriminatory violation, whether it's gender or base race, where a lot of people are affected that are in same or similar circumstances, and people can either join the class action lawsuit or opt out. Class action lawyers have to follow certain rules and regulations by posting it in the media, and I've never done a class action lawsuit, but I know they have to comply with a lot of procedural matters, and in fact, I believe there's a class action lawsuit filed on my behalf against the foreclosure banks in the state of Florida. For some reason, I think my lawyers filed that. I don't know why, but because there were a lot of people involved where these mortgages and subprime mortgages are being sold, and they've sold them so many times, turned them over so many times, that the original documents are lost.
Right.
Well, the statute says you must have originals.
Right. Okay. So now, is it fair to say, though, that class actions also do create a lot of jobs? I mean, they're big lawsuits, right?
They're huge lawsuits. They're huge. They're generally settled in the end, David, because of the costs involved. Because the court has to approve the settlement. There has to be sufficient money for everyone within the class, and of course the legal fees are astronomical because the hours these lawyers and their assistants put in are incredible. But that doesn't count. We're just making money.
Right.
But no, we are facilitating people to have the right to go against those that are violating their rights. That's all it is.
Okay, but if you got a bill making it easier, it sounds to me like you're creating another special rights for special people.
It's not about making it easier. Leave it as it is.
Right.
They're trying to take it away. They're limiting it.
Well, not this bill. The bill that the Democrats wanted would make it easier to file class action lawsuits.
That's why I'm against that.
Okay.
That's exactly right. I don't know. I don't mean if you. I didn't mean for you to misunderstand me. No, I am against that. Make it easier. It's okay the way it is.
I mean, there really ought to be. You know, I found.
Here's the problem. Why are they correcting anything? Where has anybody complained about class action lawsuits?
Well, only the attorneys who want to, big firms who want to make a lot more money, who aren't making as much money as they used to.
But they are, David.
Are they?
Oh my God, they're making millions of dollars in legal fees.
Okay. I mean,
because depending on the type of class action, depends on the type of money you get. I'm not an expert in class actions,
right?
But sometimes you're limited in the percentages. But if most cases are settled for millions and millions and millions of dollars, and you're going to get 20 to 30% of that.
Yep. That's
legal fees plus costs.
Right.
That runs to the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I know how these big law firms work, because in my lawsuit against the Moonies, I got billed when the lower attorney talked to the higher attorney, and there had three attorneys talking. So even if you were paying them a couple $100s an hour for one, and then a couple $100 more for the second one, and a few $100 more for the third, you got $1,000 an hour easily.
Yeah, and then the paralegal and the investigator and the research, absolutely.
And they charge you for paper clips and copies and everything else.
It's the art of billing, they call it.
Unfortunately, Juan, we're down to the last little bit, so we're going to have to cut this off. But I thank you for being here, and we'll continue this next week. Remember, to everybody, you only have 3 choices left. Give in and live like a serf. Fight back until you can't stand it anymore, or get out and take your freedom with you. This is David Finzer with Juan Torres on Wanton Wednesday for Truth and Lies Radio.